All right, good morning and welcome to Open Ed Week. This is day 3 of our celebration of open education. My name is Erin Maney and I'm the Manager of Communications and Community Engagement at SUNY Online. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. Whether you're joining us in person or watching on the recording, we appreciate you being here. And we're pleased to introduce and host Jeannine Kennedy. Jeannine is currently the team leader of Nursing 116, which is Nursing Fundamentals 1 at SUNY Rockland. She's been teaching nursing for 19 years, including teaching in LPN and RN programs. She graduated from the Catholic University of America in 1988 in Washington, D.C. with a BSN and worked as a registered nurse in emergency departments and trauma centers for over 20 years. She went on to get an MSN ED from the University of Phoenix. Jeannine thoroughly enjoys working with nursing students, especially at the fundamental level where you really get to see them grow and blossom. Welcome, Jeannine.
Thank you. So today's talk is going to be about a little experiment that we did at SUNY Rockland and some of the highlights and some of the lowlights of that. And this is our experiment using ATI in lieu of a textbook. And just full disclosure, ATI, as we'll talk about, is more OER-ish because students do have to pay for that resource. However, our students were already required to buy it and had been using it for years and years. So this is kind of how we got started. And this got started after we went through the traumatic COVID situation that most colleges, I think, and universities went through, where things were online, things were offline. There was a lot of scrambling to get content to students. And that kind of, I think, was the spark that started everybody sort of thinking about OER. And, so it was a bad thing that happened, but this is a little bit of good that came out of it. So this is going to be shocking to those of you who are teaching. Students weren't even buying our textbook. The textbook was too long, according to the students. It was boring according to the students. It was not interactive. It was heavy. I can attest to the fact that our textbook did weigh sort of a metric ton. And students just were not vibing with the content that we were giving them. And there was a mixed bag of feelings about it among instructors, obviously, because a lot of people felt like, hey, we read the textbook, suck it up and read the textbook like we did. And some people thought, maybe there's another way to approach this problem. The other issue that we had beyond the student feedback was we had a really successful program. Great state board pass rates, students getting jobs, flourishing in their nursing careers. And so it added an element of nervousness for us, for me, for sure, that, are we changing something that is going to fundamentally change our program? Are we tampering with something that's working? And what if we screw it up? What if we take this flourishing, fantastic program and we turn it into something that is disorganized, or students aren't getting the required content and they go on to not pass the state boards? So disaster. What if our students don't like the platform? What if we're the reason the whole thing goes up in smoke? And, the other thought process was, we all had textbooks when we were in college and we turned out okay. So, is it worth it to change something? So there was a lot of anxiety. So I wrote in my notes, cue anxiety, but we went forward anyway. And I just want to come back to this, this thought that textbooks are heavy, because that seems like a trivial thing. We had students that were actually carrying wheelie suitcases to class because of all the heavy books they were carrying. And in my last school, we actually went to the textbook company and we said, can you split this book up into a couple of volumes for us? And they said, sure, we'll do that, but it's going to be a higher price point for the students. So we obviously didn't go forward with that. So those were all, trivial and sort of non-trivial things that we considered. And then, we had to ask ourselves some very tough questions that if you decide to proceed with OER or some kind of OER platform, you're going to have to ask yourself these tough questions. Are we being good stewards of our students' time, right? Is the textbook worth it? is it worth it to switch a resource, or do we have to switch the resource because our students just aren't doing it? Are we assigning pages just because that's what we always did? Here are the pages we always assigned. It's in our syllabus. It's in our, our weekly course content. Are we doing that because we always did it? Or is this stuff that the students absolutely need to know? Is this content that is valuable for the students? Or is it content that, maybe there's some extra fluff in there? And we'll talk a little more about fluff. Is there a way to deliver content that is up to date and effective? If we switch to some kind of OER platform, is that going to be up to date? Is it going to be evidence-based? Is it going to be effective? Is it going to be more cost effective for the students, or the students are going to end up paying more for some online platform? Ask yourself, is your textbook up to date, right? And if we're being honest, we all have to say, no. Textbooks are in nursing and disciplines that change are pretty much out of date the minute they roll off the presses. Are you going to have to supplement your material with your textbook or with your OER? How much supplementation are you going to have to do? Are you going to have to do so much supplementation that it almost becomes, the platform you're choosing, the textbook you're choosing becomes sort of not worth it? Big question, is a paper textbook necessary in 2025? Are OER materials versatile enough to update, or does the platform update as information changes? And if it does, are you going to be able to sort of keep up with that in your PowerPoint, your test questions, and the rest of it? And then the big question is the work that is going to take to make the change work. Because this is a lot of work. I mean, I don't want to say, we just waved a magic wand and switched to OER. We redid everything. We went and redid our PowerPoints, our supplementary materials. We're in the process of really redoing our clinical materials, although we've gotten a good head start of this, and our tests. And this took considerable time. And this took time over the summer months that I'm going to talk about with you, where, we did this and basically we didn't get paid for it. And then there was the big one, the peer pressure. So at RCC, there was a lot of talk about OER. All the cool kids on campus were doing it. All the, tenured professors were doing it. Everybody was talking about it. There was a buzz. It was becoming more prominent on campus, and there was kind of becoming no way for us to ignore it in our course. Okay, so I just want to introduce you to our nursing students. They really are a lovely, really special bunch of students. So our students are mostly non-traditional, right? They're not the typical, what we think of as a typical college student in a typical college class. They're largely working adults, and we have lots of students who are second careerers. They don't have a great deal of disposable time. They don't have a great deal of disposable income. They have jobs, children, tons of other responsibilities outside of their classroom and their college work. I teach in the evenings. Many of my students work all day and then come to class. So they come to class tired. They come to class already burned out. If they have had a bad day at work, it becomes very, very difficult for them to sort of sit and listen and absorb. So the most efficient way that we can get content into them is the best way, in my opinion. Our students are goal-oriented. They are very type A. I will get 100 emails over the weekend from students. They're very busy. They're dedicated. They're bright. And they're probably, in my years of teaching, the most anxious group of students that I've ever worked with in my life. I've never seen students with the level of anxiety that our students have. And I think it's because they're so busy, they're so time constrained, and they really want to succeed. They come to us really wanting this in a very powerful way, and they have to jump through a lot of hoops to even get into the program. So by the time they get to us, they've already done, they've already really given a lot of time, energy, and resources to us. So the course I teach is Nursing Fundamentals 1. And I just want to give you a little background of this class. So it's called Nursing 116 now. It has a clinical and lecture component. So students will be in lecture for 2.5 hours a week. They will be in clinical for 5.5 hours a week. So just sort of the in-person aspect of our course is many, many hours. It's a fundamentals course. It's the first course that our students take. And if you know anything about nursing and fundamentals is sort of a ubiquitous term for all of the beginning skills and knowledge that students get. So if you're a student in Hawaii, and oh my gosh, wouldn't we love to be that? Or if you're a student in Topeka, Kansas, or Suffern, New York, where our school is, you're really getting the same content. You're learning how to wash your hands, you're learning infection control, you're learning how to turn and position patients and take vital signs. So it's really, fundamentals is really not different, but the way the course content is delivered is obviously different. And the course materials that are used are obviously different school to school. So our course has 109 students total. So we have a really robust program with a lot of students. There are 4 lecture sections taught by 2 lecture professors, so myself and another teacher, and we have 12 clinical sections with 9 clinical adjuncts. So lots of people, lots of moving parts. Our students really have contact with a lot of people, even just in this one course. So what I'm going to talk about in the future, slide is going to be really important to keep these statistics and this in mind. And of course, my dear friend at RCC would say, never do anything until you look at the research. So I did do a little bit of a literature search on OER. And here's what the literature kind of says. And I'm just going to say, this is in its infancy. So anybody who's really interested in this topic, this is a fantastic opportunity to do some of your own research. Because there isn't a whole lot out there. There are some themes in some of the literature if you do the literature search. So the study above, the Dorina Tilla study, this study says that OER might or might not increase student success. And I'm saying success in quotes because the way they looked at success was, what are the students' grades? For me, success, I look at success a little bit different. I look at success as, do they graduate, take their state boards, pass, and become RNs, right? So if a student gets a C plus or they get an A, they're still going to graduate. Now, I know that's a radical thing to say as an instructor because we want all of our students to be, to strive for to be A's, but I think we need to think about defining success in other ways besides what is that letter grade that student gets at the end of your course. The University of New York CUNY study showed no statistical significance between the grades of students who used OER versus the textbook. Again, let's think about other ways to define success. And I'm going to just make the argument here that there really are not enough studies to make any kind of, prognostication about, does OER help with student success or not? And then, the Flynn study is an Opino study is very interesting. This was really interesting because they did a literature search, and in their literature search, they came up with some questions. And some of the questions were, made me go, a little bit. So is the Herald of OER disrupting? So they're saying that OER is sort of disrupting the educational industrial complex. Is that good or bad? Do we need disruption, or are we just disrupting to disrupt? So I'm not giving any opinion on that. I'm just saying we need to think about that. Does the adoption of OER create more work for faculty and therefore force faculty to work free creating content? Yes, it absolutely does. We spent our summer doing this. We did not get paid for it. We did it as a labor of love because we thought it was something that was going to benefit our students. Not everybody's going to be willing or able to do that. Is OER transformative, or is it just the same stuff we've been doing for years and years, and it's just in a different, shinier, prettier, more hip package? And is government investment in OER something that we want, or is it something that we don't want? So these are sort of the questions that we're going to have to tackle and really consider as we move forward, as more courses move forward with OER. Okay, so adult learners, because our school mostly has adult learners, I wanted to look at some of the literature on that. And the literature here is a little bit more consistent than the global OER picture. And it says, and you're going to all go, we know. Adult learners are not like traditional college students. They require a different approach. This was the one that was really stuck out to me as something that was really heartbreaking. Most commonly, they are unsuccessful due to financial or family obligations. We see this every day at our school. We have students who come, they failed a test or they failed the course, and they're in your office crying, and they're saying, I just had, I have a handicapped kid, I have a full-time job, I'm a single mother, and it's heartbreaking because that they're so bright and they're so able to absorb the content, take a test, do really well, and get out there and become great nurses. But they have so many obligations, things on their plate, that they just really cannot be successful because of that. They definitely value time and flexibility. And here's the thing that I've learned after dealing with adult learners for a long time. They don't want the fluff. They don't want us to give them things that they don't need to know. If they don't need to know, if it's not imperative for them, they don't want it because they don't have time for it and they don't have the energy for it. That's a little bit difficult too as instructors, because as instructors, we really want to, we want to tell them everything we know. We want to take our brains and empty out everything in our brains into our students. And that is not really an efficient way to teach students. It's not really, and it's not really doable. I can't take 20 years of nursing in my brain and empty it into my fundamental student. It's just not possible. And it's one of the things that happened to me when I first became a teacher, because you're so excited to share your knowledge and you want to share all of it. But I think we have to restrain ourselves a little bit, especially with our adult learners, because if you start giving them fluff, they're not going to like it. So this Belair, Smith, and Cochran and Lopez study was a little bit, was very, very interesting as well. It cited 2 reasons why adults don't return to school: time and money. So again, this is a theme that I saw in the literature over and over again with adult learners. It's time, it's money, it's time, it's money. So if we can help them with one or both of those things, we're going to really increase our student success, our retention rates, which we really want, and our students coming to our college. We want them to apply, and then we want them to stay until they leave with letters after their name. So Green was the one who said that adult learners are unique, self-directed, and have an independent personality. And all of this necessitates that we just approach them and teach them differently. And again, study after study on financial duties, work duties, impediments to starting school. I mean, we've had students come to us and say things like, it was either buy my textbooks or pay my rent. That's pretty heartbreaking, right? That's a student that is not going to be able to be successful. So since we know that these are the primary reasons that students drop out of school, even if we can't say, OER increases student success, we can say that we can take some of those burdens off of them and allow them to be successful, if that makes sense. So non-traditional students, so just a little bit more research. So the Castellanos, Reyes, Salmanica, and Wiley study says that OER seems to benefit students who are underserved in higher education. And our school is full of students who are not traditional. We have a lot of first-generation students. We have a lot of, I'm going to say, older students, second career students, minority students, and anything that we can do to foster their success is important, because we know that admissions to college as a whole in our country is dropping. Less and less people are coming to college. The students who are coming to college, at least in my experience, are the non-traditional students. They're coming back to college. So we have to really think about how we can benefit these students, right? They're not coming to college with parents who can just pay for their textbooks. They're coming back to school with all kinds of other things in their backgrounds. So the Mullins and Hoffman study also agreed with that. It said that OER, has some drawbacks, but it does seem to benefit those disadvantaged students. OER adoption is time consuming. There are a ton of resources out there. It could be difficult to navigate all those resources. But we know, again, more and more students that are entering college are identifying as non-traditional. And if we want to attract those non-traditional students and keep them, we have to be better stewards of their time and their money, I think, for sure. But, the one thing I came away with this was more research is needed. So again, this is a fantastic opportunity for anybody who wants to do some research. Some other thoughts? And I just want to say, I'm not here trying to drag our textbook companies. When I was an undergraduate, my students laugh when I tell them that there was no internet when I was an undergraduate, and they laugh uproariously. They want to know how old I am. I won't tell them. So we all grew up on textbooks, right? We all had textbooks when we were in college, most of us who are teaching currently. They were the reason we were able to learn our content. We couldn't just Google something. We either had to use our traditional textbook or we had to go to a library. In fact, in nursing, we were instructed to keep our textbooks after graduation as reference books. And I did keep I kept my Pete's textbook forever. And whenever I saw a rash, I would be leafing through it, looking for, what could this rash be on this kid? When I tell my students there was no Google, they find that hysterical. So textbooks still serve an important function. And for your program, for your students, it might still be the best option. It might be what your students prefer. You might have a great deal with a textbook company where your students get their books at reduced cost. Your students might want that paper book. We'll talk about that a little bit. So it's not necessarily, OER is not going to be, the panacea of everything, I don't think. So before we embarked on this journey to switch our content to an online resource, we were really nervous. I was really nervous because our program was not broken. So why are we fixing it? And then, probably the most dangerous words in the English language, but this is the way we've always done it, right? We didn't want to screw up. We didn't want our students to give us negative feedback that now they had to navigate this online platform that they didn't like. And, there was a lot of it. I can't underscore the amount of anxiety that we felt. So if you're feeling that anxiety and that pressure about it, I'm going to say that's okay. That's normal. We did have support. We were fully supported by our program director. In fact, she's the one who sort of planted the seeds in our brain. We're wrapping for summer break. Here's a better way maybe to deliver our content. You might want to look at it. And the most important thing is we had buy-in from our clinical adjuncts and lecture professors, right? If you don't have buy-in, if you have 10 people on your team and 5 of them are just not really willing to budge on this, it might not be the right time for you. You really need that buy-in. It's just the most important piece of this, because if everybody is not willing to do it, you're going to create a really chaotic course. And we know that the ones who feel chaos the most are our students. So one of the benefits that we didn't think about was that, when we use our traditional textbook, our adjuncts didn't get a copy of the textbook. usually the textbook company would give a copy for each lecture professor, and that was it. And if the adjuncts wanted to see it, they had to go look at the library copy, or they had to come and borrow our book. So that was not ideal because adjuncts were always asking questions like, what are you covering this week? Or what does your resource say about this topic? Or, I want to make sure that when I teach my students infection control, I'm covering all the topics. And we just did not have the ability for all of them to have the textbook because of the cost of it. Now everybody has access to ATI. So all of our all of our adjuncts can just go on the platform, pull up the module that the students are learning from, read it themselves, engage with it themselves, use it when they're teaching the clinical component of the course to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page. So that has been very helpful. This also is a small detail, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times because it's so important. This allowed us to have a consistent, cohesive message throughout the course. And that is so important. I can't stress the importance of that. Having that consistent message, we call it speaking with one voice. Obviously, everybody's going to present the material a little bit differently. But having the material, everybody being on the same page with the material has been so amazing. We've gotten so many less student complaints. Professor so-and-so told me this, but then Professor so-and-so told me that. And, this is very confusing to students, especially fundamental students. When somebody tells them a normal heart rate is 80 to 100, and then somebody else tells them a normal heart rate is 70 to 100. I mean, does it make much of a difference in patient care? It doesn't, but they don't understand, they don't have the knowledge base to really interpret material. So being on the same page, if you get everything wrong and only one thing right, this is the point, I think, to get right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what we chose and why we chose it. So we chose ATI Engage Fundamentals 2.0. And I've already talked about how it's OER-ish. It's OER-ish because students do pay for the resource. However, this was a long-standing resource that students were paying for in their tuition for years. So ATI is short for Assessment Technologies Institute. This is a platform that helps nursing students prepare for the NCLEX exam. They have to take the NCLEX exam to become a registered nurse. It's not free, but our students purchase the program with their tuition, so it is a required resource. And this is another thing you might want to think about. Maybe you have resources that your students are already paying for, or that already exist in your library, or are somehow built into your students' tuition. You might want to look at those because you might not be using them to their full potential. And we did not use ATI to its full potential. I mean, our students were paying for it, and we were not using the whole platform as much as we could. We're really sort of wading through and digging into it now. So this is used for a variety of content, like our students do their clinical documentation on a piece of this. There are NCLEX practice questions, case studies, simulations, and those learning modules that we're using instead of a textbook. The nice thing about ATI, why I particularly like it, is the content is delivered in easy to digest modules. So shorter, there's no fluff. They have shorter modules, and there's much less reading than the textbook. And as we move forward, I'll tell you, students love that. So again, why we chose it? Because the students already had to purchase it. It wasn't an additional purchase for them. We were really familiar with the platform. Again, the modules were shorter, less time to read, and the modules have an interactive content. So the student might be reading a module on infection control. And then in the middle of that module, there might be an activity, which is, put the chain of infection in correct order. Or it might have a question for the student to ask, or an activity for them to do, or a little video snippet. And this is really nice for our students because they really do not have they do not sit and read 60 pages like we used to when we were undergraduates. They're just not willing to do it. The interactive nature of it has been very positive for our students. ATI and ATI sort of gives the facts without the fluff, which, adult learners, again, they do not want fluff from you. They want to know what they have to know, and that's what they want to know. Sometimes even in my lecture, I'll say, okay, you don't have to know this, but this is kind of nice to know. And I see all their faces. I'm like, all right, it's not going to be a test question, but here's something that I think you should know. So some of the features. Students can still get paper books, and they can get those paper books for free, which is, I mean, it comes in it's called a box of books. It comes in like a giant box of books. This is no additional charge to the students. They can get this just by filling out a form, and they'll just send the box of books to the student's address. Some students like that paper book. We're really, really encouraging them to engage with the modules online, but some of them like the paper. Another thing is sometimes students can't engage with electronic resources during certain times. So we do have a growing population of Orthodox and actually Hasidic students that come to Hasidic Jewish students that are coming through our program. They can't use any electronic resources during Shabbos, but they're able, I believe, to read the paper book. So some of them, they're dedicated students. They want to be able to still engage with their content. This is a way for them to do it. Another thing is we have a population of students who are active military duty, and they sometimes get sent away on, they get sent to different parts of the country or different countries, and they can't take their electronic devices with them many times where they go. So if they can take their little pediatric ATI book if they're in peds. So they still can engage with the content even when they're away at a mission or they're celebrating a religious holiday or any kind of thing where they can't access electronic media. And again, we talked about how now everybody across our course has access, which is very, very good. Another thing that is helpful with this is, and there's a reason why I put a robot on this slide, for students who have difficulty reading, and we're seeing more and more students who just have a little bit more difficulty reading and comprehending than maybe we did it as undergrads, or students who have English as a second language, and we have a lot of students with English as a second language. The platform will actually read the content to the student. Some of the students commute a long way to school, and some of them will listen to the modules while they're driving, which is very helpful, or they'll listen to it over and over again. They do report to us that the reader has a weird robotic voice, and I have heard it. It is a weird robotic voice that many of them don't want to listen to and prefer that they record our lectures and then listen back to them, which is fine. But it is a good option for students who maybe have a difficult time reading or maybe have the opportunity to put in headphones or put it on their car on the way home. And students can access the platform on computers, their tablets, their smartphones. I personally can't read anything on my phone. I don't know how they do it, but they do. So that is another helpful thing. I've had students in clinical doing their clinical documentation on the platform on their smartphone. I have to do it on my laptop. I can't see it well enough. So this is the nuts and bolts, how we actually went about and did it. So we did use the summer to do the switch. So this is how we spent our summer, goofing off and changing our curriculum to changing our content to ATI. We knew we needed a large block of time to do the work. We didn't want to be sort of pressured about it. We didn't want to do it as the semester goes on because, during the semester, we're quite busy. One of our instructors, and actually who I thanked on the last slide, was really instrumental in this. She pretended she was a student and engaged with all the materials like she was a student. And then we met several times over the summer and sort of crosswalked. Here's where we teach this, here's where it is in the modules. ATI does have a crosswalk. So the crosswalk is they have textbooks that most school, the most popular textbooks that schools use. And it'll tell you where the content is in that textbook and where it appears in the ATI module. So that is very, very helpful. You really need to read and evaluate everything. This is time really well spent. We started with fundamental students. Our fundamental students, this is the first course they take. So we're not changing anything on them. Sometimes when you change things on students in the middle of their educational experience, they get a little bit anxious about it. So we wanted to just use this resource right out of the gate. So it made sense for us to start from scratch instead of changing the student's experience. And we did use that crosswalk a great deal to align our syllabus with the new ATI modules. And this is more. So we did redid all of our course materials. We redid our PowerPoints. We aligned our tests to match the new material. We used a team approach. If you don't want the students to come at you with pitchforks and torches, then make sure that you don't have different verbiage and topics on your tests than your materials and lectures. So you have to change. I'm sorry to report, you have to change your test, right? If you're saying epistaxis in your classroom for 2 weeks, epistaxis, and then you write nosebleed on your test or vice versa, the students just are not going to know what that is. So make sure your verbiage all kind of matches. And that's why we kind of redid everything. We wanted to make sure that we were using the same terminology across the course. And, it's not going to be perfect. We did slightly supplement some of the material. So for instance, we do a lot more nursing process, care planning than existed in the module. So we just, we made our own content. So don't make the good the enemy of the perfect. Don't be afraid to create your own content to fill the gaps. And we didn't have a lot of gaps, but don't be afraid. We had to create some content, like I said, on care planning because our course is really heavy on writing care plans. And if you don't speak nursing, a care plan is a document. It's kind of like a mind map where students identify patient problems and then they write a plan to solve the problem. So care planning is a very very important part of our course. Okay, so again, if your discipline has multiple terminologies for the same thing, it is very important that you keep the terminology consistent. In nursing, there are many words that mean the same thing. Aortic valve. Sometimes they call it semilunar valve because it's a semilunar valve like the pulmonary, the pulmonic. Make sure for us, it's very easy for us to be versatile with terminology because we've dealt with all the terminology. We have a lot of experience. Our students don't. There are countless examples of how terminology, of differences in terminology, and students can be very confused by this. Remember, you're not testing English comprehension. At least we're not testing English. We're not testing comprehension. We're testing comprehension and of our course materials. Do they know how to be a nurse? Do they know how to react to patient situations? So be very careful with that. Also, using too many resources can be a point of confusion. Different resources are stylistically different. They use different terminology. This can cause students to spend time deciphering terminology and not absorbing the content, which is what we want them to do. Very problematic for our English as a second language students or our students with learning disabilities or have some minor difficulties reading. And, the studies kind of vet this out. Students report it is important for them to have their resources all in one place. It makes sense. If you have too many resources, they're likely to just pick one and do it and ignore kind of the rest of what you're doing. So be very, very tread lightly on that. Vet everything. You're the expert of your course and your students. So only you can really decide what's best for them. One of my students told me a funny story. She's from Jamaica, and she said that there was a test question about like some type of cereal, like oatmeal, or I can't remember the cereal, but she said in Jamaica, every cereal is cornflakes. So I was like, oatmeal? She said cornflakes. I said, corn pops? She said, cornflakes. So that stands to reason that if you're putting things on the test that are not culturally compatible with students as well, if you're using all kinds of different terminology, it makes your test questions cuter. But are your students understanding what you're trying to, they're sitting there trying to decipher what are Lucky Charms, and they're not reading the question and giving you, engaging with the nursing content that we want them to engage in. So a couple of things that you can consider. Consider a partial switch of your course. If you have a lecture and clinical component or a lecture and lab component, you might consider doing one to start with and seeing how it goes. I suggest that you pilot in one course to start it off. We piloted in, we did this in Fundamentals 1, and, other courses in our program are starting to kind of start the ball rolling on it. And hold off until there is enough time and resources. So don't try to cram this into your already busy semester. And I think we're almost done. Again, I said it once, and I can't say it enough. Speak with one voice across your course. Okay, a couple of things that went slightly sideways. Students needed more support navigating the site than we anticipated. A code is needed to access the material. So some of the students want to start reading before the course starts. And the information was not as seamless for our paired course, and they had to bring in additional resources. So Nursing 118 is our paired course. They had to bring in additional resources, but they've successfully navigated that. My suggestion is, if you're going to do something, put detailed instructions in your learning. We have D2L in your learning management system to help the students, navigate it. Sometimes the site can go down. You want to develop a backup plan. And then just to conclude, students love the short modules. They're telling us they love the interactive features. They really appreciate the cost settings. And the biggest news of all, they're more likely to do those readings. They're saying, I never read the textbook before, but I'm reading this, which is very, very good. And then just, we're just going to continue in this journey to align our clinical component of the course. We're going to continue to take students' feedback, and we're going to continue to delve into this platform to use other resources that are available. And then, have fun with it. And my advice is use the opportunity to change the things in your course that you've kind of been thinking about for a while. You've kind of been thinking about, we should change this. This is a great opportunity to sort of, make those positive changes that you've wanted to make. Okay, and these are just resources. Okay, I think that concludes. Boy, I was down to the wire, wasn't I?
You got it in there. All good. Are there any questions for Jeannine? There's been a lot of information shared, a lot of great suggestions too. I'm just curious if anyone actually in the nursing discipline. I do think a lot of the suggestions that you had too are really great for anyone looking to replace a textbook with, you know, a couple different options.
Yeah, it definitely has worked well for us. Our students really like it. I think, our students are very time and money oriented because they
Sure.
have to be,
Sure.
and so they really enjoy the shorter readings, and they really like the fact that they don't have to pay hundreds of dollars in
Mhm.
textbooks.
Mhm. And your student population, as you describe them, is largely representative of our online student population across SUNY. So it is important work to think about how can we alleviate some of the barriers for students. If we can do one thing, if it's a textbook, whatever it is, then we should be investigating it.
And they weren't reading the textbook.
Hmm.
Some of them were buying the textbook, not reading the textbook. I had students who weren't even buying the textbook.
Hmm.
So, I mean, what good is assigning a resource if the students aren't going to do it?
Right, right. We had a presentation on Monday. I don't know if anyone on this meeting was there, but if not, take a look at the recording. It was about student perceptions of digital reading, and the speakers went into how some students prefer the physical book, but also if they were using digital, they may print it out so that they can physically mark it up, right? So they liked to annotate that way instead of annotating on the screen. It's really interesting to investigate the student perceptions
It
of
was
print
something we
versus
had to think
digital.
about because of our Orthodox students, and we do have students who are active military.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
they, I had a student go on a mission and say, I can't take my laptop with me.
Yeah,
What can I
yeah,
do?
yeah.
Get the box of books. You can take the med surge book with you and you can read it. We'll show you which pages that we're going to be covering. So that is very helpful as well.
Mm, absolutely. I'm going to grab a couple links here for the closing, but if anybody does have anything at all that they would like to ask or share, please do so. And I'll post these in the chat for folks. So the first link is to our Open Ed website, which lists all the presentations for the week. There is a link there to the recordings as well, but you can get to our recordings on our YouTube channel with that bit.ly, the second link in the chat, and that will get you to the OER playlist for the entire week. There are also playlists for past Open Ed Week sessions and for other kinds of webinars that we have held. And lastly, Open Ed Week is featured on OE Global, and you can check out events from around the globe on that last link if you are interested. We do have 2 other sessions this week, tomorrow at 2 p.m. and Friday at 2:30. So I want to again thank you, Jeannine, for being our speaker today and for sharing all of these resources and your experience with us on this journey for you and your students.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Absolutely.